Good afternoon. A very warm welcome to all of you on the other side of the platform. And I hope all of you are and your families are safe and healthy in these uncertain times. We keep talking about this, the changes that COVID-19 has brought about to us in various walks of our life. And one of the places it seems to have impacted us equally significantly is the world of education and training. Zoom has become not just a brand name, it's become a noun, it's become a verb, it's become an adjective, and in some cases even an expletive. So that's really how it's kind of taken over our lives in a fairly significant sense. But one of the things that we wanted to explore today in this panel is to see how has technology ensured that education and training has continued, and what are some lessons we can learn from this accelerated adoption. The rate of adoption in the last couple of years has been at an order of magnitude compared to what it had been over the last couple of decades even. But we're wondering, what is it that we picked up in these last couple of years which may have long-standing effect? In other words, what are some changes that have been elastic and therefore will come back to hopefully a pre-COVID situation, and what are some changes that are likely to be more lasting? These are some questions I thought we can explore with this very, very diverse panel. So we've got experts from very, very different institutions, and I will not want to stand between them and you for long. I'll plunge into the conversation straight away. I'll use a very simple structure. We'll just call upon each of the panelists to kind of give us some initial comments, maybe about 5 minutes each. Some of you may have a presentation, and please feel free to share that. And some of you can just speak about some of your areas of focus. And then I have a few questions for each of you. I'll go with that and then pick some questions from the audience. For the audience, if you have any questions, feel free to type it into the Q&A box so that we can pick that up towards the end. So without further ado, I'll jump in. I'll do a quick introduction of the panelists. I'll begin in alphabetical order. Good friend Anand Arkalgud. Anand comes from the world of platforms and technology. He's co-founder of a social enterprise called Socion, and their emphasis is to resolve societal challenges at scale. And every conversation I have with Anand, the way Anand and his team utter the word scale, I always imagine it to be either with an uppercase S or perhaps in all caps. So that's the kind of scale that they imagine, and I'm waiting to hear from them on how they use technology to drive that kind of scale change. Next up, we have Chandrika Bahadur. Chandrika is the founder director of the UN SDG Academy. She's also the Vice President of Education at the SDSN of the United Nations. She also serves as the chair of the Lancet Commission on the COVID-19 India Task Force. So she's kind of looked at education in itself from the world of technology, but COVID also in a very, very close focused manner. So I'd like to see how we can bring those together and their impacts on the larger scale of capacity building in education. And Chandrika has also been teaching in the classroom format, both at Harvard and Columbia in the past. So I'd like her to kind of contrast the classroom teaching experience, the online learning experience, and how platforms have come to play a role in that. Chandrika, thanks for being with us today. Our third panelist is Kakul Misra. Kakul is the National Program Head of the NULP, the National Urban Learning Platform of the National Institute of Urban Affairs. An alumnus of IIM Bangalore, Kakul kind of has more than 20 years of experience as an advocate for impact-based transformation. And she's cut across both the private sector and the public sector, and she's also cut across developed economies and developing economies. So we're waiting to hear from you, Kakul, on the NULP and how that's looking at knowledge sharing as a platform for all capacity building entities in our space. And our fourth panelist, precisely by means of his name and the initials, is Dr. Suresh Rohilla. Suresh is the Senior Director at the Center for Science and Environment, where he heads the water portfolio. More than 25 years of experience with national and international NGOs, government and academics. Also been a visiting professor and researcher at the University of California at Berkeley. So we're looking to hear from you, Suresh, on what CSE has been doing in various aspects of technology. So that's our panel. And I want to start with you, Chandrika, if I may. There's a ton of online content that the Academy has been working on much before the pandemic as well. And I know that there's been an uptick in the pandemic phase. I'd like to want to hear from you specifically on your experience of what has been the uptick in terms of courses on the online platform, especially in the COVID era, and what kind of content, especially from the urban practitioner perspective, what are some of the things that you're watching? So take it away, Chandrika.
Thank you, Geetha. Thank you for inviting me. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Great. I'm just going to share my screen really quickly. Let me know when you can, if you can see it.
Yes, it's visible.
Great. So I think, the pandemic has been, to my mind, a game changer in terms of technology in education in multiple ways. And what I want to do is give a little bit of just a little background of who we are, so that kind of sets into context what I'm going to say, but also what we've seen given what we do specifically. And I think that that will just give the audience a little bit of sense of where we're coming from. So the Academy itself is an online learning platform that was set up at the request of the United Nations, focused on sustainable development. So we are very topic specific. All of our content is built around the issues covered by the Sustainable Development Goals. And we started off, Geetha, as you know, as being primarily a massive open online MOOC provider, right? That is what we did. And our focus at that time when we began, which is now nearly 8 years ago, so we've had the bulk of our experience really pre-pandemic. Our idea at that time was to be able to use technology pretty much for scale factors to be able to reach people around the world, because our audience was a global audience. And our goal was to be able to put together materials on sustainable development, which is, it's a very wide field. It's a very diverse set of topics. And for the general public, not all those topics are equally interesting. But what we wanted to do was to make them engaging, make them interesting, and essentially reach as many people as we could with the goal of providing a base level of fairly in-depth knowledge on each of these topics. So the challenge really was, because we had such a global and a generalized audience, the challenge was assuming zero knowledge, so starting literally from scratch, but then very quickly working our way up to a fairly sophisticated level of understanding for each learner on these topics. And so that was our original goal. We started with one course, we're now up to nearly 40. And we have expanded very much in terms of not just the number of courses or the content, but the formats. And I'll come back to the formats a little bit, because I think a lot of this was affected by the pandemic. And so we have now video series, we have webinars, we have an online book club, we have podcasts, we have a community of practice for crowdsourcing content. We have a formal master's program, which is operational in about 38 universities around the world. We have an online master's program. We have a program that coaches young people to go into schools and teach about sustainable development. And we have a program that focuses very much on teaching the issues covered by sustainable development and global citizenship in schools. So it's a very diverse, it's something that's really expanded organically, but also in response to what we've seen happen during the pandemic. This gives you just a quick sense of scale. We reach pretty much every country in the world. 600,000 formal enrollments. We know the actual numbers are higher because a lot of people access our material without formally enrolling in the course. About 50 members around the world that practice what we do. And I should preface this by saying that the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, which is our parent organization, has about 1,600 universities from around the world in its membership. So all of our content goes automatically to all 1,600 universities. What did we really see during the pandemic? And I just want to show you just a quick graph that gives you an indication of where we saw the bumps happen. And we saw the first bump happen really around just after the first lockdown. So March, April 2020 was where we sort of saw a bump. And then the second bump that we saw happen was actually March, April this year. So it's almost kind of and we're seeing this as an annual, we're quite curious to see what happens this March and April. We still haven't figured out, we know why that bump happened in 2020. We still haven't quite figured out why the bump happened this year. We think it's a course specific bump, but essentially what we've seen is the trajectory, the sort of slope rise after the pandemic. We've seen particularly, an increase in people who are willing to pay for certificates. And I think that has changed pre-pandemic to now. So the way our courses are offered is they're offered on edX. And so at the start of a course, a learner can decide whether they want to pay for it's about a $50 certificate at the end of the course, or just take the course and not take an exam and not get any formal certification for it. And we've seen that about 85% of our courses outperform the edX average of the proportion of learners who opt for a certificate. So it's a disproportionate number in the case of the academy that want a certificate, and this has really happened post-pandemic. So in a sense, it speaks a little bit to the openness of, I think, learners as well as potentially employers and potentially organizations to recognize what a certificate from an online course would be, which didn't exist in the same way in the past. Most of our sort of learners are from, the typical countries that dominate online learning: the US, India, the UK, a large number from Nigeria, which is a little unusual, and Brazil is the next one in line. But as I said, representation comes from around the world. I'm going to skip over this particular slide because it essentially just tells you that across formats, across everything that we're doing, we're seeing a huge amount of engagement in different formats. We have podcasts now. We have a library where people can come and pick and choose content material that's relative to them. We have a lot of live events. And this space has really exploded in a way that just didn't before the pandemic. And so what are the lessons for us? And I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about a few of these lessons, because I think we're also in a stage at this point at the academy where we're doing a lot of introspection, trying to make sense of really what has happened over the last 2 years. So I would say on the content side, because our content is open to everybody, both to a mix of full-time students as well as to working professionals, we've seen that working professionals typically congregate in a few courses, not across all the courses. The urban course is one of them. So cities always has a large proportion of working professionals. The course on early childhood development is one that has predominantly working professionals. And then we have a few courses that are more how-to courses. So we have a course on measuring sustainable development, which is extremely popular and again, attracts working professionals. And I think that is a function of the topic of the course, but it's also a function of how the course is structured and how practical is the course in terms of the kind of capacities it is actually helping learners develop. The second point that I would make is across the spectrum, for capacity development for professionals, skills-based courses dominate. And I say this as coming from a provider of knowledge-based courses. So, our courses are not skill-based typically, and we do know that is why we get more full-time students than we do working professionals, because typically, in the working space, in the professional space, people need to brush up on very, very specific skills. And that's where we see a lot of the working professionals come in. We have a youth counterpart, SDSN Youth, that runs and has been running for 4 years now, a program called the Local Pathways Fellowship. And this is essentially picking young fellows from around the world to work in cities on local issues of urban development. They started off with about 50 fellows in 2017, and every year since they've increased the number of fellows. They now have approximately between 110 and 120 fellows around the world. And each of them goes through a sort of an abbreviated version of the Sustainable Cities course as a core part of their training. And I think we've seen some very, very good feedback for that. And so I think the lesson for us there has been that knowledge courses can actually be tailored and contextualized to very specific organizational requirements, but that takes work. It's taken SDSN Youth a lot of work to actually do that. So it's not something that we can offer generically, but the tailoring is a very important part of success there. What we have seen, and going back to my point about skills, when we saw the spike in demand at the start of the lockdown, one phenomenon that we saw, it was confirmed by our colleagues at edX, was that there was suddenly a huge increase in the demand for courses that helped people make sense of the world, that understood, what exactly was happening around us. So suddenly our global public health course spiked in terms of demand because COVID was a trigger for that. We've also seen a lot of interest in courses that have been traditionally not very well received. So we have a course on ethics in action, which talks about the ethics and the moral imperative to care about sustainable development. Huge spike post-pandemic. And so these are sort of very interesting trends for us, because it speaks to us that when there is uncertainty, when there is when we know that, and climate change is another one where we've seen a huge spike in one of our new courses called Nature-Based Solutions to Development. And that's again because people are trying to understand what happens when things are going wrong in a way that we don't understand. And we don't have a good grasp on, so they're trying to make sense of the world. So I think that is the exception to the skills based demand that we've seen. And finally, local relevance and context matters enormously. One of the issues that we've been struggling with continuously is that most of our courses are available in English, and localization, translation, making sure that we have faculty from different parts of the world is a huge factor. And I would say one of the reasons why the Sustainable Cities course is so popular is because of the diversity of the faculty, because there are faculty members from different parts of the world. And we saw that actually when the cities course was first launched, that enrollment spiked every time a new faculty was announced. So when there was a faculty announced from Uganda, we saw enrollments go up in that country. And so I think that again is we get a real-time sense of what, where students are getting enthused and what is interesting for them. And I think the more we can, and particularly for working professionals, not just people interested in learning for its own sake, but people who are wanting to apply this information, making sure that the content is specifically relevant to their needs, to their organizational needs, to their personal needs, becomes very important. Moving on to formats and learning platforms, what we've really seen is that people are demanding a lot more flexibility in how they learn. So the idea of a structured course that people have to follow for 8 to 10 weeks at a time is becoming harder to sustain because people want to be able to learn when they can, particularly true for people with full-time jobs, but true across the board. Interactivity is an old story with online learning, a challenge, but absolutely essential. And we've seen that re-emphasized in recent times as well. Shorter formats. I think the attention span is going down. That's a secular trend. So the shorter, and there is a challenge because when we are trying to get across complex information, you cannot actually beyond a point simplify it. It takes time. It takes time to absorb. It takes time to explain. And so the shorter formats are definitely more popular, but they do hinder, I think, at some point. There's a threshold effect beyond which you can't make a video any shorter. So you have to compensate by making it more engaging, more entertaining. And so that's the other flip side of the formats. And finally, I would say learners are much, much more willing to experiment with different formats, and they're much more at ease with technology in a way that wasn't the case 2 years earlier. So this is something that we've seen unfold quite systematically. And so what lies ahead, and I'm going to end with this slide, I would say first, going back to my previous point, barriers to technology have gone down significantly, not just on the learner side, but I would say on the instructor side. So that actually makes a very, very big difference to how technology is going to be integrated into learning environments in the future. This is actually, it's unprecedented. We've been working in EdTech for nearly a decade now, and it's never been this easy. It's never been this easy to have both acceptance of online learning, but also recognition of what it can and cannot do. So just the familiarity, the comfort, the ability to pick and choose formats that make sense to learners and to instructors has increased beyond what at least I had imagined. And we had our first online live course that we had launched in February 2020, which was a real-time course and conversations with people in faculty in different parts of the world, it was a nightmare. It was a nightmare to convince faculty that they could do that. It was a nightmare to get the technology working. We used Zoom, but Zoom was a different Zoom at that time. Very clunky, very difficult. And what happened just 2 months later was a completely different situation. So I can't emphasize that enough. I would say that as a channel, and again, coming from a pure tech-based provider, I would say that there is limited effectiveness in education purely through technology. And really, it is a hybrid format that will thrive moving forward. We are quite convinced of it because even with the academy, even though we only use technology as our channel, our 1,600 universities actually take elements of our content and use them in their classrooms. And that's really where they are effective. On this point, though, I would say that tech is far ahead of pedagogy. And that has been the traditional challenge with technology, with EdTech, because the technology has always been there, but educators and instructors have not quite known how to use it. And my hope post-pandemic is that because instructors have been forced now to interact so closely with technology, that they will be able to influence the design of EdTech in a much, much more sophisticated way than has happened in the past. And by this, I mean elements of what content should be delivered online, what content should students have access to before they enter the classroom, what is it that instructors will do in the classroom once students have absorbed that content, and what is this balance between a real face-to-face engagement versus what happens over a screen. I would say organizational learning systems also have to catch up, and by this I mean the both not just the human resources, but really the training and the development departments of organizations. Because again, there's a very structured, very, I would say, at this point, outdated would be the word, notion of what capacity development is in most organizations that we interact with. So there's very little imagination at work in terms of what really can happen and how employees can not just learn, but be assessed and be rewarded for continually retooling themselves. And I think that's a gap that is not a technology challenge. It's really a challenge of how do you use it in a way that is most effective for what the organization wants its employees to be capable of doing and where their potential is. And the final point I want to make is that there's a huge demand for reskilling and retraining. This is going to continue. It's going to become the norm as people realize that they can acquire new skills without necessarily upending their worlds. They can do it while they're still working in their regular jobs, and as they also become more flexible in terms of where they work, where they live, and how they actually think about their careers, not as a single segment, but as maybe multiple segments through the course of what is likely to be a very long working life. So I want to stop here and either open it up for questions now or we move on.
Thanks, Chandrika. That was a great overview, and a few questions jumped up, but I'm going to save the questions after we go through the rest of the panelists. But a few paradoxes, in fact, seem to surface to me in terms of people seeking skills over knowledge, but still seeking to find meaning with the word. It's almost like saying, is happiness a skill that I can acquire by studying? So it kind of looked very paradoxical to me, but I'll come back to you with a few questions. Thank you so much. I'll move on to Dr. Rohilla. Dr. Rohilla, I know you've been responding to COVID with a lot of innovative approaches, both in terms of live training in the time-bound format and other online courses. So can you just talk us through your experience in terms of how CSE has been addressing the COVID scenario in terms of capacity building and training?
Thank you very much, Anand. Good evening to all. I direct the water program at CSE. I'm also the senior director at Center for Science and Environment, whereby capacity building is evolved as a programmatic progression. And we are involved in policy advocacy, research, and we have contents which we want that it should reach out to not only just the sector people, but other people also play an important role in creating enabling framework for those innovation in policy and innovation in practice. That's what we call it, to achieve the big ticket change in in the area of environment. And we just to give you a background that CSC has had a digital presence for a long. We have a Down to Earth magazine which reaches out to large number of people, a fortnightly published magazine which has a digital version and Hindi and English both. And we have a good database in terms of contacts, people to whom we reach out from digital as well as print editions. And we have been, for last decade or so, we have been doing capacity building. And also a decade ago, we went global. So these are some backgrounds that, we work in South Asia and we work in also, Africa and other countries. So with this background, we share our national learnings with our global partners and global sector players. So this is the background. And we, at the moment, School of Water and Waste is the first school of the residential training center, which we started in 2017-18. And you can imagine that we had just started to take off. And then in 2020, the COVID happened. But I should say that we were not caught unaware, frankly. CSC had in 2016 developed its first online course with UNESCO IHE, and we had the preparedness for this. In spite of that, we knew and we debated about that, going online would be cutting our business for a residential training program, which is a business of non-profit. Actually, we are a registered non-profit, but we had thought that no, we should invest into this because we have to reach out to many people and outside India also. And we are located in Delhi. We don't have branch offices any other part of the world. So we were always aware that we need to go online. And we were ahead of time. In 2016-17, we delivered the first course, and I will not name an institution, but there was a national institution which didn't want to go online. And this opportunity fell with us, and we offered this online course on preparation of shit flow diagrams, which is the course called, and we are part of a global e-learning platform, which is consisting of topmost universities in the world. And we were the only, I think, 1 or 2 NGOs who were registered for delivery partner. And I'm happy to say that when the COVID came, we had the platform ready. We offer our courses on Moodle, and we offer not something like master's courses or a long courses, but we offer a week-long course or a month-long course, nothing beyond that. But we also have engineered in our own way, because I'm from a generation where we never had many online courses, but I have registered in many online courses where I have never completed any, not many of them. If I say I registered for 100, I would not have completed more than 5 or ever. So this was the experience which I had. So we also had experience that we work with people from diverse backgrounds, starting from school children to teachers to media to engineers, planners, and government officials. 50% of my intake for any course is basically other people, and 50% is government people, government functionaries, and they all have a different expectation in the courses. So each and every training program, in fact, we thought that going online would reduce the efforts, but going online increased the efforts, because my trainings are curated. Each and every training is curated depending upon also the kind of participants we have. We tailor-made the efforts to reach out, and I can say that we had 65 programs and 20,000 people in 2 years only for my water program. I would say this were the kind of reach we had. And we had a learning that we have to offer blended training programs. Certainly for basic knowledge about the subject and sensitization, we could have large number of people through online contents. But we also felt that, for example, if we were doing a training program which was dominated with government people who were not well versed to the online platform, then we had to do more virtual sessions or face-to-face sessions into that. And we had to also say that if we had other training participants who are the current generation or young people, then we had different kind of assessment formats, because our online courses also have a very rigorous assessment form. So we also had a different assessment format for government people, that who gets completion certificate, who gets participation certificate. But certainly there is an assessment. Nobody goes without assessment in this online courses also. But yes, number of contact hours or face-to-face virtual sessions are there more if we have more government participants in that. This is one of the things which I would like to. So every program is curated and tailor-made in that session. If we have a tie-up with a university for one tailor-made online program, then we were giving more time for people to go on Moodle and access the material. and then come back to us. We also have hand-holding support events in this. We have an active discussion group in every Moodle course where people engage with and deliberate about the live issues. So I think these were some of the things which we used, and the learning is that we have now started offering. In the past we never did. We were trying to bring people to our training center, which we continue to bring now. And in last 6 to 9 months, we have successfully revived our residential training, which are largely advanced trainings, whereby there is a need for people to be in there, then only they come there. However, we have started offering, saying part A and part B. Part A is always online, and part B is the advanced training where they are engaging on ground, and we use the Harvard case method to have interactive experiential learning experience, which sometimes we found that it was difficult with some of the participants when we were online, like dividing them in groups and making them work in groups. So I think that happens only with the Harvard case method, what we use for teaching learning. So and also other thing is that many of our participants go in progression from level 1 to level 2. For example, we look for our alumni who is progressed to attend our advanced trainings. If the top 5 participants of online courses are taken to our advanced training program, so they are given fellowships to attend programs. So we have built in some criteria that who comes to our advanced trainings. So general training is for all, but advanced training is for only top scorers or somebody who completes the course. I think these have been some very interesting experiences I just wanted to share with you, and we are also evolving. However, maybe later on I would come back if you have more questions. As CSC, we were always open, we were always prepared. Water program, which was the first program to start online and blended program in 2016, was well prepared, and CSC's other 6 schools immediately used the platform, and we offered our courses, and more than 2,000 courses are 200 training programs are offered online, and we have quite a good number of people attending these courses. These are other than the webinars, which I would say. I would say that we also, because we had webinars and for other tools for teaching learning, which were attracting a number of as high as many times 2,000 people. We never expected that we could do this, because if you were doing a public event in one of the 5-star hotels or a conference or any event in a state, we would be able to cater to only 100 people or 200 people. So we were able to attract 5,000 people. Then live streaming, all these opportunities have come as a good learning, where we are able to record the sessions if somebody misses out and share with them, but also reach out to many number of people. I think these are some learnings. So webinars are not integral part of our training programs, but what we do is some of our resource person session in the training programs which is restricted to only participants, we open up for general public also, for anybody can attend. We are also using mixed method approach in this, that we can open up few select sessions open for all, so that particular external resource person or an internal resource person's talk goes open as a webinar. I think we are trying different combinations depending upon the interest area and the topic. And also when we work with government functionaries, for example, we always start an online program even with a launch event. For example, if we are working with government, so we would, if government participants, we are ensuring that they should attend all, and they should attend all the sessions, which they should spend time on Moodle as well as attend live sessions. So we bring in a Secretary Government of India who talks about it. This is just in half an hour session. But in that window, we take an opportunity to tell them how to access Moodle, what will they go through. I think these are something which I wanted to share. I'll stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Suresh. I think it's kind of segued very well with what Chandrika was also talking about in terms of formats. I think there's a format for engagement, there's a format for delivering the education and for the experience as well. And I can see a lot of that coming together between what the two of you have done. And I'll come back to you with a couple of questions, especially on the assessment side. You did talk about the rigor with which you do assessments. And I think that's one of the big challenges that we seem to be seeing in the online space in particular. We'll come back to that as we finish the round with the others.
One more point can I add? We also have a rigorous screening before we enroll or register participants. That's also which I forgot. Each and every applicant is going through a screening process.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I'm looking at you now, Kakul. I think it's waiting to hear about the NULP. I know it's been a very significant initiative under the NIUA. Just to understand what its vision is, what what it means for us as capacity building partners as well, right? So it's in terms of one is providing content, then getting feedback, getting learners, that whole cycle. So over to you.
Thanks, Geetha. So firstly, it's been quite interesting to listen to the perspectives that's been brought up by Chandrika and Dr. Rohilla. Before I straight away go to NULP, I'd just like to briefly share the context of how did NULP come about being. So we all, I mean, the audience here, we all hear about, the great Indian urban story. The fact that urban India is growing, it is the engine for the $5 trillion economy. What we also realize along with it is as much as the opportunity is there, so are the challenges that need to be overcome. And within that, the two words that you used initially when you were speaking about Anand, the speed and the scale. From the government perspective, it becomes something that we are looking at speed and scale to kind of accomplish across the 4,800 plus statutory towns and UNPs we are looking at. So in February 2021, the National Urban Digital Vision was launched by Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. Honestly, the entire tenet of that mission is how do we leverage technology? And I must say technology is just an enabler, not the end goal. How do we leverage this digital infrastructure to kind of get to kind of break the vicious cycle of resource abuse, if I may use a word, towards resource optimization and breaking the data silos to support the states and the cities in enabling this opportunity and capturing this opportunity and serving the citizens. Having said that, hence within this mission, the key thing was what is a digital infrastructure? And as much as we were looking at driving urban governance through this digital infrastructure, therein came this entire need for capacity building. And this capacity building, it's very interesting, like Chandrika said, there is knowledge, there is skills, there are formats, there is a pedagogy. At an enterprise level, if you look at it, there are challenges. Imagine that at the scale of a nation. So with that context in mind, one of the open platforms that were visualized was the National Urban Learning Platform. Essentially saying that we need to put together, when I say open, I'm saying it's totally inclusive, accessible, open with no business model around it currently, and enabling three key roles, which is that of a learner, that of a content creator, and that of a content reviewer, and to consolidate all the learnings that are needed, that are need-based, that are needed by to start with, our primary target audience are the city administrators, city officials, who will be delivering the services to the citizens. And with that view in mind, NULP was formalized. NULP is a Sunbird-based platform. I definitely don't want to go into the technology part of the discussion, but largely keeping that in mind, there are three key frameworks, which is, okay, we need to get a supply side going, which is all about aggregating, curating courses, content. It could be, by the way, bite-sized content. We have been speaking about the formats, which can address the needs of the learning audience. So that's a supply side. Then there is a demand side. Obviously, the demand side is to put it simplistically, just aggregate the demand from all cities. But that's the most simple statement with its layers of complexity underneath. So we do need to acknowledge that when we speak about capacity building or training need assessment or learning need assessment, it's an entire range. For example, a city can simply say, and I'm quoting this with a real life example here without naming any city here, City X saying that, you know what, we are always prone by many disasters and issues. Affordable housing, housing formats, get me policy, get me procurement, get me ways of it was implemented, and then build the skills of the necessary team, which is in-house and outsourced. So it's an entire range, right? You come and some can just simply say, just give me a peer-to-peer connect that who can I speak to in that city because they've done this wonderful job. So what I'm trying to put here is in the context of demand creation, when we speak about this under the mission, it kind of traverses an entire range. And we keep saying urban is like sectors and sectors. It's not one sector. It's multiple sectors rolled into one. Currently on NULP alone, we have 14 domains: climate, transport, water, sewerage, planning, e-governance, IT, behavioral, the entire management piece, you know. So it's a very large canvas. And we also need to keep in mind that we have to simplify this canvas. So whenever we have spoken about the building blocks of the mission and the digital infrastructure being one part of it, we have kept in mind that we have to create something which can evolve as a platform, which can be used, reused, extended, be modular, and kind of used basis the need of that audience. So with that in mind, NULP, I'll go back to NULP now. NULP was created, and I mentioned supply, I mentioned demand, and the third pillar was community building. How do we get that community building and sharing going? I must bring in, while it's not connected to NULP, but we have heard of the IGOT platform and Mission Karmyogi that's being driven, largely targeting MDOs. But NULP is already kind of beyond the beta version, taken this model to say that, okay, on these three pillars, how do we aggregate what are the learning needs? How do we curate and fulfill those learning needs? And how do we kind of get that entire partner ecosystem together? That's been our vision. We started off by, doing our phase 1 where we engaged with 17 cities. We took Submerged, as I said, as a platform, designed to be a very basic LMS. I must say, having seen multiple digital platforms, I would say NULP is a very basic vanilla version which enables getting people together on these three roles that I spoke about: being a learner, being a content creator, and being a content reviewer. And we took a feedback from the initial set of 17 cities. And I must say, since we were speaking about pandemic, we did this bang in between, in middle of the phase 1 of pandemic. Earlier, we called this a city activation workshops, and it was planned in a face-to-face mode, but we did this completely virtual. And I think around 4 cities in it was a blended format of delivery. And it was quite an experience because our cities ranged from an NDMC or a Indore or a Bhopal to a Namchi, So the representation of the cities in the phase 1 was very interesting mix of the maturity of the city in terms of their own, skills, capacities, and knowledge. After having done that, it was a very positive feedback, and everyone's been sharing about the uptake post-pandemic. We experienced that too. Today, as we speak, we have 30 plus cities on NULP, and we are soon going to have 100 cities as users on NULP, and an ecosystem of approximately 90 partners. And all this has happened because the minute we spoke about, because this entire, by the way, mission and the NULP is value-based. There's not a mandate coming from the ministry, unlike some of the other missions, right? It doesn't have any financial outlay. It does not have any so-called policy linkages that you have to do this. This is purely driven by the value they perceive. And while it's initial days for us, it's been a 1 year plus journey so far. We have basically tried to kind of create frameworks which work across the feedbacks we've been kind of getting. And I'll give you 2 or 3 examples of that. The first example of that is, basis the needs, some of the programs are curated as certificate programs. Already we mentioned, all these are standard tenets of blended learning delivery. So we, for example, realized that what really works, and I'm keeping the learning audience in mind, which are the city officials, is that it really needs certificate programs. And the certificate programs, I wouldn't say are skills, because those are very intense and they need to be taken up as blended, but they are applied knowledge. They are not knowledge products. They are curated knowledge products, which have been curated in phase-wise delivery on the platform. We had launched 2 certificate programs. Our last recent launch of the certificate program was an international program that we launched on climate, and we received in a period of 2 weeks over 300 learners, just on the basis of the need to kind of address that. As we say, NULP is all about capacity as per your need, on the go and at scale. We also we've understood that you can never ever replace the formats of workshops, visits, the traditional models of capacity building. And hence, in our city activation workshop and our engagement with the cities, we always say this is a supplement, this is a delta. It can happen as a pre-workshop, then you do your workshop, and it can happen as a post-workshop in terms of reinforcement. What's also important that works well is the assessment linked certification and tracking mechanism, because data is very important. So every single time you have to track data at scale, the completion at scale, and this is done across filters of, let's say, city level, state level, department level. You are able to do and view and get reports around this. And if it gets linked back to certain policies, this enables that as well in terms of reporting, very much like the SDMS or the skill portal of GUI. So, from that aspect, I think this is around NUDP and NULP. And when we talk, and there are so many partners here, as I was listening to them, I was like, we need to kind of get more partnerships going. We keep saying, it's like saying that we are curating a Coursera for urban. And as we do that, it has to be something that is inclusive. See, getting into business models at this stage is something from a perspective of government we do not want to engage in outright, because it gets its own complexities. So it works very well as reducing your cost of acquisition, because you get your visibility at a very national scale. And we do kind of, as mentioned by Dr. Rohilla, even we do kind of some launch of the certification programs as they go along. Also, some of the missions of the ministry are going to be curated and made available on this platform. This platform will become the delivery mechanism, which serves as a hook for getting the users on the platform. What we have to always talk about, see, go live happens, a certain value happens, but what's very interesting to watch is the adoption metrics around how is the uptake. Also, what we have realized is it's extremely important to keep on curating relevant content as per the needs, because that's one of the value pillars. So in NULP program, our program, what we are doing is every quarter we are consolidating learning needs from the cities. And that becomes like a guiding, pillar for us to curate courses as we engage with our partners. And so in interest of time, I'll cut down on that. The only thing I'll say is that how do we engage with the providers, training providers, content providers? How do we engage with the research agencies? I think the business models are immense, and we should not look at it from a prism of just commercial engagements. But the engagements with respect to, like I said, cost of acquisition, the engagement with the lens of data and data-based research reports, there are immense possibilities, which we are exploring with few pilot programs as well. And I hope we know this is a journey, it's a 5-year journey for us. And we eventually want this to be used and be of value. With a spread of 4,800, we are looking at really deep value of engagements with some cities, hopefully by even them kind of coming back with their use cases of how they have leveraged NULP to facilitate their implementation of a project or a program or a mission. So I'll stop here in interest of time and happy to take questions as it comes along.
Thank you, Kakul. That's really an ambitious sweep, I would imagine, even if, given a 5-year window, it's still quite ambitious. So quite a few interesting points there. We're kind of aggregating those points. I'll come back to that, time permitting. Anand, looking at you to look at platform thinking and digitalization, how do you conceptualize, how do you deliver at scale, as we keep discussing, especially, how do you think through your theory of change? So over to you, Anand.
No, thank you. I don't know if I'm going to share, as I was listening to everybody. It was nice. It's nice meeting you all. I was just thinking maybe the things that I should call out are slightly different than going into technology. So first of all, I feel that when we say capacity building, what I'm hearing is many of the prior speakers are sort of engaged in institutional capacity building. So I want to preface what I'm saying by saying that we're focused more on building capacity at the community level. We're talking about capacity to address problems like water security, or local livelihoods, access to capital, non-farm artisans, those kind of things at a community village level, right? Which is quite different, I think, in the approach that we have to take. So I would say the way we've always thought is, what is the problem we're solving? I don't think capacity building is the problem. I think the problem is we're all getting ourselves beat by the problem. Problems are growing way faster than everything else we're doing. So our ability to solve is chasing the problem for 20, 30 years, and the problem is running away. That is the only problem. Capacity building, technology, everything is in service of our ability to catch up or outpace and solve that problem. I think that's something we constantly remind ourselves. Otherwise, we will end up building an industry and not solving problems. That is our biggest concern. So if I have to give you whatever I can in the time that I have, for example, if our problem definition is misplaced, we keep saying, the right solution to the wrong problem is still the wrong solution. So keeping that in mind, I want to share a few things. First thing is, because we focus on frontline, one of the things that we saw is we tend to isolate and think about individuals, but actually they're not individuals. They're a cluster of individuals that are interdependent on each other. Every time you go in and you say a Krishi Mitra or a village facilitator, I mean, they're just a starting point. The reality is they have a network of others, a Krushak Sati or a PDO or somebody else that surrounds them. So you're actually educating the community. You're not educating and building the capacity of individuals. So one of the things that we have to understand is our capacity building approaches should not be directed towards individuals. It should be in a manner that individuals can educate individuals. So what we say is it's not one to many, but many to many and any to any, right? So we have to democratize knowledge. We have to demonopolize knowledge. So if we have to think about these kind of problems, I think it becomes inevitable, the scale at which we're talking about this, right? It becomes inevitable that we have to use some form of technology. I think mobile access is something. And of course, people will approach it with a fair amount of skepticism, saying, will it exclude people? My question is, yes, it will exclude people. But what about the people who have access and don't have access, who have access to mobile but don't have access to knowledge? Right? Why are we excluding them? Why don't we get to the 90% and help the 90% get to the 100%? So think of them as a community, don't think of them as individuals. I think one of the first big mistakes we found we were doing, and I guess others were doing as well, is we tend to think of capacity building as a means to make everybody independent and independently capable. And I think it's a big mistake. I think we have to use technology, data, and knowledge to trigger interactions between humans. Because if you really think about issues like climate and COVID and poverty, they exist because somehow in the current way of thinking, we put economic value and individual good above collective good. Now, if you have to put collective good above individual good, people have to interact more. If everybody's staring at a phone, I think we will lose the plot, right? I have to give you something that will make you want to talk to Dr. Rohilla. I have to give Dr. Rohilla something that will make him want to talk to Chandrika. And I think even if we disagree, there is relationship in disagreement. So the way we see these collective good discussions happening around water security, for example, or protection of commons, it is not that everybody gets what they want, but through dialogue, they come to an agreement saying, if I say this, I know you're going to get upset. So I'm not going to say that, but I will offer an alternative, right? So knowing the constraints, limitations, and aspirations of everybody else, and using knowledge as a means to facilitate a collective good outcome, I think is incredibly important. Otherwise, again, like I said, the idea of capacity building is not to build a million individual bots called humans who are just looking out for themselves. I think human to human interaction has to be encouraged through this. So we have to democratize knowledge. We have to empower people with knowledge. So not that we're not the only people who are sharing knowledge with them. We have to then empower them to share knowledge with others. And through that, these sort of multi interactions happen. So this is one aspect of it. This other thing is, I think when we look at programmatic efforts, we have to realize that we have I think we've lost the difference between training and capacity building. We say capacity building, but what's really happening is training, right? Training is a one-time activity. There's a start and an end. Capacity building is a runtime activity. We learn every day. We are lucky enough I'm lucky enough to interact with all of you. Now tell me, if you're a village facilitator, how many times do you get to have a professional interaction with somebody, because you're the only Christian in town, right? So there is a problem. There is a serious problem that people have identified, like professional isolation, that if you are the only doctor in a remote village, imagine for a second, you're the only knowledgeable person. It's actually quite lonely, disconnected, and you don't know whether what you're saying is right. You don't have anybody to check you. You don't have anybody to validate your thoughts, right? If you try to be creative, you're on your own. This professional isolation is incredibly challenging, right? So when we think about building knowledge, you have to create a runtime solution, which includes constantly updating my knowledge, constantly validating my knowledge. And when I met a Krishi Mitra in Kionja district in Odisha, I said, you sound like somebody who would be very actively talking. How come I didn't hear anything from you? She said, "Hum sirf bol ke nahi seekhte hain, sun ke bhi seekh lete hain." So the opportunity to listen to other people asking questions. They asked a question. Oh, I know the answer to that question. So it is not just about knowledge transfer. It is confidence that what I know, that I'm capable, that I can apply that knowledge. I have to have the confidence. So as I hear other people asking questions, I say, you know what? I know the answer to most of them. I think I'm okay. I don't have to feel insecure. I can go ahead and start applying this knowledge, right? So that self-efficacy piece is something we don't address. Coming back to the idea, we think if we just give a book and a knowledge and PPT to somebody, somehow they're empowered. We know that's not how it works, right? So question is, programmatically, how do we go beyond giving people knowledge? How do we create mechanisms where human-to-human interactions happen more often? How do we create mechanisms where their efficacy improves? How do we give them the ability to kind of sense, understand, exchange, build relationships, know that if I call Geetha, he will pick up the phone. So I am going to go ahead and try something and I have access. We use our networks, for example, as a part of our ability to apply knowledge in practice, right? I will not try cooking something if I didn't have my mom on the hotline, right? But tell me, if you're the only water person in the community and somehow all that burden is on your shoulders and you don't have access to anybody because that person who taught you only comes in January once a year and gives you training. How does this work? So I think we need to be paying attention a lot more to that. Now, I want to talk about this thing called virtual that came up. We faced a lot of resistance. And I think one of the positive externalities of COVID is virtual has become like the fashionable thing. 2 years we struggled. 2 years. Everybody from NGOs to institutions to organizations to government people told us it is impossible. It turns out COVID solved our network problem, where everybody told us nobody's accessible and they don't have access. Turns out they're all sitting and watching videos and talking to us on video. But some amazing thing happened. When we started using virtual, women came out and said, thank God you guys are doing virtual. Every time you organize a session somewhere in the district, I have to leave my child, ask my husband to stay back and travel there. It's a pity that we didn't catch that. It's a pity that the social sector didn't catch that for 20, 30 years. It is very unfortunate, right? Not only that, when this lady was sitting at home and on Zoom with 20 or Zoom or whatever, Teams, 20 people there, and she's presenting something and they're all acknowledging, and there are 2 kids kind of over her shoulder watching this. And then she says, this is the first time they saw me work. All they knew is I leave home. Wo kahin jati hai, pata nahi kya karti hai. But now they're like, oh my God, this is important stuff. Keep quiet, she's talking. So there is a very different level. I think we need to stop treating. I hear so many people saying, oh, I'm not a tech person. But you can be human. Understand the human implication of technology. Imagine if you don't have access, right? We have disproportionate access. So I think we need to start looking at the human implications of technology. We need to start understanding and embracing it. We cannot keep fighting it, right? We are actually excluding more people by fighting technology. I think the argument has gone on for too long, saying that virtual will exclude people. I think we need to challenge that. I think that time has to come where we say, stop doing that. You empower one individual in 1,000, they will go empower the other 999. We are not suggesting every person in the villages to have a smartphone, right? This argument is increasingly getting, in the way of development. right? So finally, I want to say, leave you by thinking about a few things. See, we have always talked about capacity building, but when do we say capacity is built? 20 years we have trained people. Where are they? Can I find somebody who can fix my water problem in my well? Where is that person? By the way, do you know we have trained over 4 million of them? Right? So I think we need to shift our thing. We need to use digital. We need to give people a record. People who have those skills, they belong to the informal workplace. They don't have recognition for skills. You know, people have been trained for 15 years. They have an average of 20 to 30 trainings a year. Micro skills, they're incredibly skilled, but there is no recognition of it. Why? Because we lounge in this environment that is configured for education. It is not factoring people who have micro skills. You know, it's the guy on the corner street whose food you enjoy, but they will never get hired as a chef. Why? Because they don't have a formal record of their skills, right? We have 2/3 of the world's workforce, and the social sector has most of them in it. So I think we need to start looking at this more practically. We need to understand that if states have to feel like capacity has been built, all the NGOs, all the departments, all the schemes, all of us that have worked in a state have to leave behind a record, a verifiable, accessible, discoverable record of content we have built there. We have to democratize it. Anybody else that comes after us should find it. They shouldn't create it all over again. Why are we creating content on springs, on groundwater? This is the most traditional knowledge we have in this country, right? Where are the practitioners? Why can't we find practitioners? Can a state start using those practitioners rather than training them all over again? It's exhausting. What about the content that those people created? What about the work? Where is a record of that? I think it's time we stop using the word capacity building and start talking about leveraging built capacity. With that, I will stop and give it back to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Anand. I think that's a brilliant synthesis of what we've been talking about here in terms of using technology. I think Kakul talked about it, saying that technology is a means, not an end. I think you kind of humanized it brilliantly. I wish we had time for questions, but we're kind of already 15 minutes behind, and Suresh did indicate to me that he had to go for another meeting as well. But we've kind of synthesized all our thoughts on that. This has been absolutely outstanding. We spoke about technology for an hour, but we spoke about human beings for 80% of that time. And I think that's testimony to how technology has kind of made a very, very good impact in our lives. Thank you so much for each one of you for taking the time out and sharing your wisdom here. And we've benefited a lot from that. Thank you so much. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Geetha. Thanks, everyone. Pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, Geetha. Thank you, Chandrika, Suresh, Kakul, and Anand for joining us today.